The blind date never showed, but the 9-year-old in the white dress who appeared at Sarah's table knew her name, her address, and exactly how much debt was destroying her life. When the girl said, "My father is a mafia boss," Sarah realized the empty chair had been part of the plan all along. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The reservation was for 7:30, and I arrived at 7:15 because that's what responsible adults do when they're desperately trying to make a good impression on a blind date they're not even sure they want to go on. The restaurant was one of those places that screamed old money and new pretension. All soft lighting and white tablecloths and waiters who moved like they were performing ballet, rather than delivering overpriced pasta to people who probably wouldn't appreciate it anyway. I smoothed down the front of my black dress for the 100th time, checking my reflection in the gilded mirror near the entrance. 32 years old, newly divorced, and sitting alone at a table for two on a Friday night. This was not how I'd imagined my life would look when I was 20 and planning a future that seemed so certain back then. But life had a way of rearranging your expectations until you barely recognized the person staring back at you from expensive restaurant mirrors. The hostess here, a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine and probably judged everyone who walked through those doors, led me to a corner table with a view of the entire dining room. Perfect for people watching, terrible for feeling invisible, which was exactly what I wanted to be right now. She set down two menus with practiced elegance and informed me that my server would be with me shortly. I thanked her and immediately buried my face in the wine list, pretending to be fascinated by varietals I couldn't pronounce and vintage years that meant nothing. My best friend Rachel had set this up. She'd been relentless about it for months, insisting that I needed to get back out there, that hiding in my apartment with takeout and true crime documentaries was not a sustainable life plan. She'd met someone, she said, through a colleague at her law firm, someone perfect for me. Someone successful, charming, emotionally available, all the things my ex-husband had pretended to be before revealing himself as a serial cheater with commitment issues and a gambling addiction. I'd been too naive to notice until our bank accounts were empty, and he was somewhere in Atlantic City with a woman whose name I never learned. So here I sat, alone at table 12, watching couples and business associates and groups of friends enjoy their Friday eve, while I waited for a man whose name was David, and whose face I'd only seen in two carefully curated photos that Rachel had shown me on her phone. He looked normal enough. Nice smile, good hair, the kind of generic handsomeness that could belong to a dentist or a serial killer, and you wouldn't know which until it was too late. My therapist said I was developing trust issues. I told her that was called learning from experience. The minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. 7:20, 7:25, 7:30. I ordered a glass of wine I didn't really want, just to have something to do with my hands and justify my continued presence at this table. The server, a young man with kind eyes and an accent I couldn't quite place, brought me a Pinot Grigio that probably cost more than my electric bill and asked if I'd like to wait for my companion before ordering appetizers. I told him yes, maintaining the fiction that someone was actually coming, that I hadn't been stood up by a man I'd never met who'd probably taken one look at my social media and decided I wasn't worth the effort. By 7:45, I'd finished the wine and was seriously considering ordering another, along with the most expensive entree on the menu out of pure spite. If David wasn't going to show up, the least he could do was fund my consolation dinner through the guilt he'd hopefully feel when Rachel inevitably called him to demand an explanation. Though men like that rarely felt guilty about anything, that was one of the first lessons my divorce had taught me. I was reaching for my phone, preparing to text Rachel and admit defeat when I noticed her, a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, standing beside my table with the kind of confidence that seemed entirely out of place for someone so small. She wore a white dress with tiny flowers embroidered along the hem, her blonde hair pulled back with a pearl clip that probably cost more than my entire outfit. But it was her eyes that caught my attention. They were old eyes, the kind that had seen things children shouldn't see, that carried wisdom and wariness in equal measure. She looked at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable, assessing me the way a jeweler might examine a diamond for flaws. I glanced around, searching for parents or guardians who might explain why this child was standing at my table, staring at me like I was a puzzle she was trying to solve. But the dining room was full of people absorbed in their own conversations, their own lives, completely oblivious to this strange moment unfolding in the corner. "Excuse me," I said, trying to inject warmth into my voice despite the oddness of the situation. "Are you lost? Can I help you find your parents?" The little girl tilted her head, studying me for another long moment before speaking. Her voice was clear and surprisingly mature for someone so young. "You're Sarah Mitchell. You're supposed to be on a blind date with David Rossi, but he's not coming." The blood drained from my face. How could this child possibly know my name? How could she know about David? I hadn't told anyone except Rachel about tonight, hadn't posted anything on social media, hadn't even mentioned it to my coworkers because the whole thing felt too pathetic to share. Yet here was this little girl, stating facts she had no business knowing with the casual certainty of someone reading from a script. "How do you know that?" My voice came out sharper than I intended, fear making it brittle. "Who are you?" She pulled out the chair across from me and sat down with the practiced grace of someone accustomed to fine dining. Her small hands folded neatly on the white tablecloth, and she met my eyes without flinching. "My name is Sophia, and I know about your date because my father sent David a message this afternoon. He told him not to come. The restaurant noise seemed to fade into background static. Nothing about this made sense. Why would this child's father interfere with my blind date? How would he even know about it? And more importantly, what kind of parent allowed their 7-year-old to approach strangers in restaurants to deliver cryptic messages? Why would your father do that? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Who is your father? Sophia's expression remained perfectly calm, but something flickered in those old eyes. Something that looked like calculation. My father is Marco Valentini. Perhaps you've heard of him. The name hit me like a physical blow. Everyone in this city had heard of Marco Valentini. He was the kind of person that newspapers wrote about in vague terms, always careful never to state explicitly what everyone knew to be true. The kind of person who owned half the restaurants and nightclubs, who had politicians and judges on speed dial, whose business interests were never quite explained but always seemed to involve large amounts of cash and carefully maintained silence. Marco Valentini was, in the most polite terms possible, a very dangerous man to know and an even more dangerous man to cross. Your father, I said slowly, processing this information, is a mafia boss, and he told my blind date not to come tonight. Why? Sophia smiled, and it was not the smile of a child. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly how much power she held in this moment. Because David Rossi owes my father money, a lot of money, and my father doesn't like it when people who owe him money try to start new relationships without settling their debts first. It shows poor character and worse priorities. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing through implications I didn't want to consider. David was in debt to the mob. Serious debt, apparently, if Marco Valentini had gone to the trouble of warning him away from it, which meant Rachel's colleague had set me up with either a compulsive gambler or someone involved in illegal activities, or both. And now I was sitting in an expensive restaurant being given this information by a 7-year-old girl who spoke like a contract negotiator. So your father sent you here to tell me this? To warn me about David? Sophia shook her head, blonde curls bouncing with the movement. My father sent me here to offer you a deal. He thinks you seem like a nice person. Someone who doesn't deserve to get mixed up with David's problems. But he also thinks you might be useful to him. The word useful sent chills down my spine. I'd heard enough true crime podcasts to know that being useful to someone like Marco Valentini was not a good thing. Useful people in his world tended to end up in very bad situations, testifying in court or disappearing, or worst of all, becoming so entangled in criminal enterprises that they could never escape. I'm an accountant, I said firmly. I work for a marketing firm. I do taxes and budget reports. I'm not useful to anyone except my boss and the IRS. Sophia's smile widened. That's exactly why you're useful. My father needs someone trustworthy to review some financial documents. Someone with no connection to his business, someone who can look at numbers and tell him if the people he works with are being honest. He's willing to pay very well for this service. One consultation, one evening of work, and you walk away with enough money to make your divorce settlement look like pocket change. This was insane. I was sitting in a restaurant being propositioned by a child to commit what was almost certainly illegal financial activities on behalf of a crime boss. The rational thing to do was stand up, leave immediately, maybe call the police. Definitely call Rachel and yell at her for setting me up with someone connected to organized crime. But I didn't stand up. I didn't leave, because Sophia had said something that made my pragmatic accountant brain override my survival instincts. Enough money to make my divorce settlement look like pocket change. I was still drowning in legal fees from the proceedings, still working overtime to cover the debt my ex-husband had accumulated, still living in a studio apartment because I couldn't afford anything bigger after selling our house to pay creditors. What kind of consultation? I heard myself ask, and even as the words left my mouth, I knew I was making a terrible mistake. Sophia reached into a small purse I hadn't noticed before and pulled out a business card, white cardstock with elegant black lettering, just an address and a time. Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock. Bring your laptop and your expertise. My father will explain everything when you arrive. She stood, smoothing down her white dress with small hands that should have been holding dolls or coloring books, not conducting mob business in fancy restaurants. Before she left, she turned back to me one last time, that old knowing look back in her eyes. My father also wanted me to tell you that David Rossi is not a good man, Sophia said quietly. He has 3 other women he's seeing right now, none of whom know about the others. He was planning to use your income to pay his gambling debts while pretending to build a relationship with you. My father thought you should know this before you waste any more time waiting for men who don't deserve you. Then she was gone, disappearing into the restaurant crowd like she'd never been there at all. I sat alone at table 12, staring at the business card in my hand, knowing that accepting this invitation would change everything about my carefully controlled, safely boring life. The server appeared at my elbow, kind eyes curious. Will you be dining alone this evening? I looked at the empty chair across from me, thought about David Rossi and his debts and his lies, thought about Rachel's terrible judgment in men, thought about my overdue credit card bills and my empty apartment and the life I'd been living since my divorce. Small and scared and so very tired of playing it safe. Yes, I said, picking up the menu with new determination. I'll be dining alone, and I'll have the most expensive thing on this menu. I ordered the lobster, $48 of crustacean that I charged to the credit card I'd been trying to pay down for 6 months. Because if I was going to consider working for the mob, I might as well start making questionable financial decisions immediately. The irony wasn't lost on me that an accountant who prided herself on fiscal responsibility was now eating expensive seafood while contemplating criminal conspiracy. The business card sat on the table beside my wine glass, its plain elegance somehow more threatening than if it had featured skulls or threatening messages. Just an address in the warehouse district, a time, 8 o'clock tomorrow night, 24 hours to decide whether I was brave or stupid or desperate enough to walk into whatever waited for me there. I ate slowly, mechanically, tasting nothing while my mind ran through scenarios that ranged from unlikely to terrifying. Best case, this was some kind of elaborate prank, and I'd show up to find Rachel and her law firm colleagues laughing at how easily I'd fallen for it. Worst case, I'd be walking into a situation that would end with me either dead or implicated in crimes I couldn't even imagine. The middle ground scenarios, the ones where I actually did consult on financial documents and walked away with money and no consequences, seemed too good to be true. And in my experience, things that seemed too good to be true usually were. By the time I finished dinner, I'd convinced myself 3 separate times to throw the card away and forget this entire evening happened. And 3 separate times I'd talked myself back into at least considering the offer. The rational part of my brain, the part that had gotten me through college and professional certification and a divorce that had nearly broken me, screamed that this was insane. But there was another part, a part I didn't like to acknowledge, that was tired of being rational, tired of playing by rules that had gotten me exactly nowhere, tired of being the responsible one while people like my ex-husband gambled away our future and people like David Rossi juggled multiple women and mob debts without apparent consequences. The server brought me the check with a smile that suggested he'd seen plenty of women dining alone after being stood up and knew better than to comment. I left a generous tip because even when considering criminal activity, some habits were too ingrained to break. Then I walked out into the cool September night, the business card burning a hole in my purse like evidence of a crime I hadn't yet committed. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it 2 hours early. Small, neat, organized in the way of someone who controlled her environment because she couldn't control much else in her life. I dropped my purse on the kitchen counter and immediately opened my laptop because research was what accountants did when faced with unknown. If I was going to make an informed decision about this insanity, I needed information. Marco Valentini's name brought up exactly what I expect. News articles that danced around direct accusations, referring to him as a prominent businessman with interests in hospitality and entertainment. Society page photographs showing him at charity galas and restaurant openings, always impeccably dressed, always with the kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. There were older articles, too, from when he was younger. References to his father's import-export business, which everyone knew was code for organized crime. Mentions of investigations that never led to charges. Witnesses who recanted testimony, prosecutors who mysteriously dropped cases. And there were the rumors, the kind that lived in comment sections and true crime forums. Stories about people who crossed the Valentini family and disappeared. Businesses that refused to pay protection money and mysteriously burned down. Accountants who'd been asked to cook books and ended up in witness protection or worse. I read until my eyes burned and my coffee had gone cold, until the apartment felt too small and the walls pressed in with the weight of information I hadn't wanted to know but couldn't unlearn. At 2 in the morning, I finally admitted I wasn't going to sleep. I made more coffee and opened my own financial files, staring at the numbers that had defined my life since the divorce. $43,000 in legal fees still outstanding. $15,000 in credit card debt from the marital accounts my ex had maxed out. Student loans that would follow me to my grave. Rent that consumed half my paycheck, leaving barely enough for groceries and utilities and the small luxuries that made life bearable. I was 32 years old and financially underwater, working a job that paid reasonably well but would never get me ahead. Never let me save for retirement or buy a house or take a vacation that didn't involve counting pennies. I'd played by every rule, done everything right, and still ended up drowning while men like David Rossi schemed and borrowed and apparently owed money to the mob without it destroying their ability to date multiple women simultaneously. The business card sat on my coffee table, white against the dark wood. I picked it up, turned it over in my hands, feeling the quality of the cardstock. Expensive paper, the kind used by people who had money to waste on details most wouldn't notice. Marco Valentini was clearly successful, whatever his methods, and he was offering me a chance to solve my financial problems with one evening of work. That's what Sophia had said. One consultation, review some documents, walk away with enough money to change my life. It sounded too simple. But then again, maybe that's exactly what it was. Maybe wealthy criminals needed accountants just like everyone else. Maybe this was a purely professional transaction that had nothing to do with violence or danger or any of the scenarios my true crime-obsessed brain had conjured. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. How did it go? Is David as perfect as I promised? I stared at the message, debating how much to tell her. That her colleague's friend was in debt to the mob, that I'd been approached by a child delivering messages for her criminal father, that I was seriously considering accepting a consulting job from someone whose business interests were probably illegal. In the end, I typed a simple response. He didn't show. I'll tell you about it tomorrow. Three dots appeared and disappeared several times as Rachel composed and deleted responses. Finally, she sent, "I'm so sorry. He seemed really nice. Want me to call him and yell?" "No," I replied. "It's fine. Really, it wasn't fine. None of this was fine." But I couldn't explain that to Rachel, couldn't drag her into whatever this situation was becoming. She was the friend who'd helped me move out of the house I'd shared with my husband, who'd held me while I cried over divorce papers and empty bank accounts, who genuinely thought she was helping by setting me up with men who turned out to be disasters. I couldn't burden her with the knowledge that her latest attempt at matchmaking had connected me to organized crime. By the time the sun came up, I'd made my decision, or rather, my financial desperation had made it for me. I would go to the address on the card. I would listen to what Marco Valentini had to say. I would look at whatever documents he wanted reviewed, and if anything seemed too illegal, too dangerous, too far outside the bounds of what I could justify to myself, I would walk away. Simple, clean. A business transaction with clear boundaries. I repeated this reasoning to myself throughout Saturday, as I did laundry and grocery shopping and all the mundane tasks that made up my life, as I tried on and rejected 5 different outfits before settling on professional business casual, because how did one dress for a meeting with a mob boss? As I transferred a bottle of pepper spray from my everyday purse to the bag I'd carry tonight, a precaution that felt both necessary and absurd. By 7:30, I was ready, or as ready as someone could be when walking knowingly into a situation that would either solve all their problems or create far worse ones. I stood in my bathroom examining my reflection one last time. Brown hair pulled back in a neat bun, minimal makeup, black slacks, and a gray blazer that said professional but not trying too hard. I looked like an accountant going to a business meeting, which was exactly what this was, I told myself, just a business meeting. The address led me to a building in the industrial district, kind of neighborhood that gentrified during the day with artisan coffee shops and converted loft apartments, but emptied out after dark into something vaguely threatening. The building itself was nondescript. Old brick with tall windows that had probably housed a factory decades ago. Now it looked like the kind of place where bodies were disposed of in crime novels. I sat in my car for 5 full minutes, engine running, hands gripping the steering wheel. This was my last chance to change my mind, to drive away and go back to my safe, struggling existence, to forget about mysterious little girls and mob bosses and offers that were too good to be true. Instead, I turned off the engine, grabbed my bag, and walked toward the building's entrance. The door was unlocked, opening into a lobby that had been renovated with surprising taste. Exposed brick, polished concrete floors, soft lighting that managed to be both modern and welcoming. A man in an expensive suit stood near an elevator, as if he'd been waiting specifically for me. "Miss Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying the same accent I'd noticed in Sophia. "Miss Valentini is expecting you. Please follow me." The elevator was the old industrial kind, all steel, mesh, and visible mechanisms. We rode up in silence, the man studying me with the professional assessment of someone paid to evaluate threats. I wondered what he saw. A nervous accountant in over her head? A potential problem? Just another person who'd accepted an invitation they shouldn't have. The elevator opened directly into what must have been the entire top floor, and it was nothing like I expected. Instead of dark rooms and threatening atmosphere, I found myself in a space that looked like it belonged in an architecture magazine. Open floor plan with gleaming hardwood, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the city lights. Furniture that managed to be both elegant and comfortable. And at the far end, near the windows, sat a man who could only be Marco Valentini. He stood as I approached, and I was struck by how normal he looked. Probably mid-40s, well-dressed but not ostentatious, with dark hair graying at the temples and the kind of face that would blend into any corporate boardroom. Only his eyes gave him away. They were sharp, assessing, the eyes of someone who missed nothing and forgot less. "Miss Mitchell," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming." I realized my daughter's approach last night was somewhat unorthodox. She has a flair for the dramatic. I shook his hand, noting his firm grip, the calluses that suggested he was more than just a businessman. Unorthodox is one word for it. Terrifying is another. He smiled, and it transformed his face from intimidating to almost charming. "Please sit. Can I offer you something to drink? Wine? Coffee?" Promise nothing is poised. The fact that he felt the need to specify nothing was poised did not inspire confidence. "Coffee," I said, because wine felt like a bad idea when your judgment was already questionable enough to bring you to a mob boss's penthouse. "Black, no sugar." Marco nodded to someone I hadn't noticed standing near the kitchen area, and within moments a cup appeared on the low table between us. I settled onto a leather sofa that probably cost more than my car, setting my laptop bag beside me like a shield. Marco sat across from me in a matching chair, his posture relaxed but alert in a way that reminded me of predators in nature documentaries. Calm until they needed to move. "I appreciate directness, Miss Mitchell, so let me be clear about why you're here." He leaned forward slightly, hands clasped between his knees. "I have business partners who I suspect are stealing from me. Significant amounts of money moving through accounts in ways that don't align with our legitimate operations. I need someone with no connection to my organization to examine the financial records and tell me if my suspicions are correct. And you chose me because a child happened to encounter me at a restaurant?" He smiled. "I chose you because I've been observing you for 3 weeks, ever since David Rossi's name appeared on a list of people applying for credit with one of my lending lending operations. When my people investigated him, they discovered his connection to your friend Rachel, and through her, to you. Coffee turned bitter in my mouth. You've been watching me for 3 weeks? Standard practice when evaluating potential assets. Your background check was quite thorough. Graduated top of your class from Northwestern. CPA certification achieved on your first attempt. 7 years at Morrison & Associates. Consistently excellent performance review. Then the divorce, which your ex-husband initiated despite being the one who'd accumulated substantial gambling debt. You refused to file for bankruptcy, choosing instead to work overtime and maintain your credit rating. That kind of integrity is rare. I wanted to be angry about the invasion of privacy, but mostly I felt exposed. This man knew details about my life I hadn't shared with anyone. Had probably read my financial records, my employment history, maybe even my therapy bills from after the divorce. You had no right to investigate me without my knowledge. I had every right, he corrected gently. You were potentially connected to someone who owed me money. In my world, that makes you relevant. But what I discovered was someone with skills I needed and circumstances that might make her amenable to helping me. So I arranged for David to receive a warning about maintaining his current relationship commitments until his debts were settled, knowing that would leave you available for a conversation. You manipulated my entire Friday night, created an opportunity for us both. You needed money. I needed an accountant I could trust. David needed motivation to take his obligations seriously. Everyone benefits. The casual way he admitted to orchestrating the entire situation should have terrified me. Instead, I found myself fascinated by the strategic thinking behind it. This was a man who planned several moves ahead, who saw people as pieces on a board to be positioned for optimal outcome. It was coldly calculating and unnervingly effective. What exactly would this consultation involve? I asked, because I was already here, already compromised by the simple act of showing up. Might as well understand what I was considering. Marco stood and walked to a desk near the windows, returning with a tablet. He handed it to me, and I found myself looking at spreadsheets, transaction records, account statements spanning what looked like 3 years of financial activity. You'd review these documents, track where money originates, where it ends up, identify any discrepancies between reported income and actual deposits, flag transactions that appear designed to obscure the movement of funds. Essentially, tell me if someone is sophisticated enough to hide theft from standard auditing practice. I scrolled through the data, my professional instincts automatically noting irregularities. These are restaurant businesses, among other things. The Valentini family owns legitimate enterprises across the city: restaurants, nightclubs, catering services, event venues, all legal, all properly licensed and taxed. If there's theft occurring, it's happening within those legitimate operations. The distinction was important. He was asking me to audit legal businesses, not to help him launder money or hide criminal proceeds. That was a line I could potentially live with, but I needed to be certain. And if I find evidence of theft, what happens to the people respond? It depends on what you find. If it's simple embezzlement by middle management, they'll be offered the choice of repayment or prosecution through legal channels. If it's something more complex, involving my business partners betraying family trust, then the resolution will be handled internally. Internally meant whatever mob justice looked like. I didn't want to think too hard about that. Will I be testifying in any legal proceeding? No. This is for my private information. You provide the analysis, I decide how to act on it. You walk away with no further involvement. How much are we talking about? I asked, because I needed to understand if the risk was proportional to the reward. Your daughter mentioned enough to make my divorce settlement look like pocket change. I need specifics. Marco reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. He set it on the table. Inside that envelope is $20,000 in cash. That's your retainer for tonight, for agreeing to listen and consider my proposal. If you decide to proceed with the full analysis, I'll pay you $200,000 upon completion. All cash, all untraceable, yours to do with as you please. I stared at the envelope like it might explode. $20,000 just for being here? $200,000 for actually doing the work. That was enough to clear all my debts, start a savings account, maybe even put a down payment on a small house. It was life-changing money, which meant it came with life-changing risks. Why so much? For that kind of money, you could hire a dozen accountants. I could hire people who work for me, people who might have loyalty to those I suspect of theft. I need someone outside my organization, someone with no stakes in the outcome beyond professional accuracy. Your independence is worth paying for. And you're silent. There it was, the real price. Not just my accounting skills, but my complicity in keeping whatever I discovered confidential. If I took this money, I couldn't go to authorities with what I learned, couldn't report potential crimes or testify against anyone involved. I would be bound by an agreement that had no legal standing but absolute practical enforcement. Because people who broke deals with Marco Valentini didn't get second chances. I need time to think about this. Of course, take the retainer. Consider it payment for your time tonight, regardless of your decision. If you choose not to proceed, keep the money with my compliments. If you decide to help me, call the number on that card my daughter gave you. We'll arrange secure access to the full financial record. I picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. $20,000 in cash, just sitting there like it was nothing. Like this was a normal business transaction instead of a crossroads moment that would define who I became from this point forward. Can I ask you something? I said, meeting his eyes. Why involve your daughter? Why send a 7-year-old to approach me in a restaurant? Marco's expression softened in a way I hadn't expected. Sophia's 9, not 7, and she asked to be involved. She's being educated in the family business. learning how we operate, how we evaluate people and opportunities. Having her make initial contact was a test for both of you. I wanted to see how you'd react to an unexpected situation, and she wanted to practice her assessment skills. You're training a 9-year-old to be a criminal. I'm training my daughter to survive in a world that doesn't forgive weakness, just as you're learning to survive in a world that doesn't reward playing by rules others break constantly. We're not so different, Miss Mitchell. I stood, clutching the envelope in my laptop bag. I think we're very different, Mr. Valentini, but I appreciate your directness. I'll consider your offer. He stood as well, extending his hand again. I hope you'll accept. You have a gift for seeing patterns others miss. That's valuable in any world, legitimate or otherwise. I shook his hand and let the man in the expensive suit escort me back to the elevator. The ride down felt longer than the ride up, the weight of the envelope in my purse growing heavier with each floor. By the time I reached my car, I was shaking, not from fear exactly, but from the magnitude of what had just happened. I'd walked into a mob boss's penthouse, had a civil conversation about accounting fraud, and walked out with $20,000 in cash and an offer that could either save my life or destroy it completely. The rational part of my brain screamed that I should take the retainer and run, disappear, maybe even go to the police despite the obvious dangers. But I didn't drive to the police station. I drove home, parked in my usual spot, and carried the envelope up to my apartment like it was the most normal thing in the world. Inside, I locked the door, drew the curtains, and opened the envelope on my kitchen counter. $20,000 in $100 bills, neatly banded and crisp. More money than I'd ever held at once. Enough to pay off 3 credit cards completely. Enough to stop the collection calls and late payment fees that had become the soundtrack to my existence. And this was just the beginning. Just the retainer for considering a job that would pay 10 times this amount. I made coffee and opened my laptop, looking at the screenshots I'd taken of the tablet Marco had shown me. Even that brief glance had revealed irregularities any competent accountant would notice. Transactions that didn't quite make sense. Patterns that suggested money being moved through accounts in ways designed to avoid detection. This wasn't simple bookkeeping. This was sophisticated financial manipulation by someone who understood how auditing worked and how to stay just ahead of it. The professional challenge intrigued me despite my better judgment. This was exactly the kind of complex problem I'd specialized in during my graduate work. Following money trails, identifying fraudulent patterns, building cases, pure financial analysis. I'd dreamed of working for the FBI once, using my skills to catch white-collar criminals. Instead, I'd ended up doing tax returns and budget forecasts for marketing executives who barely understood their own spreadsheet. Marco Valentini was offering me a chance to use my actual talents to solve a puzzle that would challenge everything I'd learned about forensic accounting. Yes, it was for a criminal enterprise. Yes, it came with risks I couldn't fully calculate. But it was also the most interesting work I'd been offered in years, and it paid better than anything I'd ever imagined. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I hope you arrived home safely. The offer stands for 72 hours. After that, I'll pursue other solutions. It was signed simply MV. I stared at the message, then at the money on my counter, then at my laptop showing financial irregularities that made my accountant brain itch with the need to investigate. 72 hours to decide who I wanted to be, the struggling accountant playing by rules that had never worked in my favor, or someone willing to step outside those rules for a chance at something better. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of hangover that came from not drinking, but from making decisions that fundamentally altered who you believed yourself to be. I'd spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, the envelope of cash hidden in my sock drawer like contraband, which I supposed it. $20,000 in untraceable bills acquired through association with organized crime. Even if I'd never touched another penny of Marco Valentini's money, I'd already crossed a line by keeping her. Rachel called at 9, her voice bright with the forced cheerfulness of someone who felt guilty about a setup gone wrong. Brunch? My treat. I want to hear everything about Friday night, and I promise I'll never trust Kevin's judgment about men ever again. I met her at our usual place, a cafe 3 blocks from my apartment that served overpriced avocado toast to people who convinced themselves spending $15 on breakfast was an investment in wellness. Rachel was already there when I arrived, occupying our favorite corner table, 2 mimosas waiting despite the early hour. You look terrible, she said as I sat down, and I mean that with love. Did you sleep at all? Not much. I sipped the mimosa, the champagne bubbles sharp on my tongue. It was a complicated night. I'm so sorry about David. Kevin swore he was a great guy. Successful architect, recently divorced, supposedly looking for something serious. I feel awful that he just didn't show up. It's fine, I lied, because how could I explain that David's absence was the least interesting part of Friday night? That I'd been approached by a child working for her mob boss father? That I currently had enough cash in my apartment to pay off most of my debt, with an offer for 10 times that amount if I was willing to compromise every principle I'd ever claimed to hold? Rachel studied me with the sharp attention of someone who'd been my friend long enough to know when I was hiding something. What aren't you telling me? Nothing important. I just did some thinking about my life, about where I'm going, the divorce, the debt, working 60-hour weeks just to stay barely afloat. I'm tired, Rachel. Tired of playing by rules that don't seem to apply to people like David or my ex or anyone else who just takes what they want without consequence. This is about more than a bad blind date. She was right, of course. It was about everything. About being 32 and feeling like I'd wasted a decade on a marriage to a man who'd lied about everything that mattered, about working a job that was respectable and boring and would never get me anywhere beyond comfortable mediocrity, about watching people like my ex-husband move on with their lives, their mistakes forgiven or ignored, while I drowned in the debt they'd created. The waitress arrived with our food, buying me time to construct a response that wasn't completely honest, but wasn't entirely false either. I think I might take on some freelance consulting work. Private clients better pay than what Morrison and Associates offers. It might mean some late nights and unusual hours, but the money would help. That sounds great, Rachel said, her relief visible. You're too talented to be doing basic tax returns anyway. What kind of consulting? Financial analysis? Corporate clients mostly. I can't really discuss specifics because of confidentiality. The lie came easily, which should have bothered me more than it did, but I was getting comfortable with small deceptions, with the space between what I said and what was actually true. It was a skill I'd never needed before, but apparently one I could develop when necessary. We finished brunch with Rachel talking about her own work drama, something involving a senior partner and a paralegal and office politics I couldn't quite follow because my mind kept drifting to the money in my sock drawer and the decision that waited like a bomb with a 72-hour timer. When we parted ways outside the cafe, Rachel hugged me with genuine affection. I'm glad you're okay, and I promise no more blind dates unless I've personally vetted the guy. Maybe I should just introduce you to someone from my firm. At least then I'd know they're not complete disasters. Maybe, I said, knowing I wouldn't take her up on it. Whatever happened with Marco Valentini's offer, whether I accepted or walked away, I was done with Rachel's matchmaking, done with pretending I wanted the kind of safe, conventional relationship that was supposed to make me happy. If Friday night had taught me anything, it was that I was capable of considering options I'd never imagined before, that the person I thought I was might not be the person I actually wanted to become. Monday arrived with the harsh, fluorescent reality of my actual job. Morrison and Associates occupied 3 floors of a downtown building that had been modern in the 90s and now just looked dated. My cubicle was standard issue, gray fabric walls decorated with the kind of motivational posters management thought inspired productivity, but mostly just depressed everyone who had to look at them. Sarah, my supervisor Craig, appeared at my cubicle entrance with his usual Monday morning energy, which was to say none at all. I need you to review the Hendricks account. They're claiming deductions that seem questionable, and I want a second set of eyes before we file. I spent 4 hours examining tax returns for a couple who owned a small chain of dry cleaning businesses. They were trying to write off a trip to Hawaii as a business expense by claiming they'd attended a conference on garment care innovation. The receipts told a different story. 5 days at a luxury resort, spa treatments, luau's, exactly 1 afternoon session at a conference that cost $50 to attend. It was the kind of casual fraud that happened constantly. People convincing themselves they deserved tax breaks they hadn't earned, that rules were suggestions rather than requirements. I flagged the deductions and sent my analysis to Craig, who would have an awkward conversation with the clients about adjusting their return. They'd be annoyed, might even take their business elsewhere, but they wouldn't face serious consequence because this level of tax avoidance was normal, expected, the kind of thing that happened when people believed the system was rigged against them anyway, so why not try to game it? The hypocrisy wasn't lost on me. I was judging the Hendricks for their questionable deductions while sitting on $20,000 in cash. I hadn't reported his income. While considering an offer to help a mob boss identify theft in his organization, the difference, I told myself, was that I knew what I was doing was wrong. I wasn't deluding myself about the nature of the choice. That had to count for something. Tuesday brought a surprise visitor to Morrison and Associates. I was reviewing quarterly reports when my desk phone rang, the receptionist informing me I had someone waiting in the lobby. I wasn't expecting anyone. Hadn't scheduled any client meeting, but I headed down anyway because it beat staring at spreadsheets that were making my eyes cross. Sophia Valentini sat in the waiting area looking impossibly small in one of the adult-sized chairs. She wore a private school uniform, navy blazer with a crest embroidered on the pocket, her blonde hair in 2 neat braids. A woman I didn't recognize sat nearby, probably a nanny or bodyguard, reading a magazine with the kind of alertness that suggested she was aware of everything happening around her. "Miss Mitchell," Sophia said, standing with practiced politeness. "I hope I'm not interrupting your work." I glanced at the receptionist, who looked as confused as I felt. "This is Sophia. She's the daughter of a potential client. We'll use conference room B." The small conference room offered privacy and windows overlooking the street. I closed the door and turned to face the 9-year-old who'd appended my life 4 days earlier. "What are you doing here?" "My father wanted me to check on you. You haven't called the number yet, and we're now at 48 hours remaining. He's concerned you might be overthinking the decision. Your father sent you to my workplace to pressure me into accepting his job offer. He sent me to remind you that you've already accepted $20,000. That money creates obligation whether you proceed with the full consultation or not. Walking away now doesn't return you to innocence. It just means you've taken payment without delivering service." The casual way she delivered this veiled threat was somehow more disturbing than if Marco had sent one of his suited enforcers. This child understood leverage, understood how to manipulate guilt and obligation, because she'd been raised in a world where these were survival skills rather than moral failures. I could return the money. You could try, but my father's generosity comes with expectation. Returning his gift would be seen as an insult, and my father doesn't accept insults gracefully. I sat down heavily in one of the conference room chairs. So my choices are accept the job or insult a mob boss. That's not really a choice. Sophia's expression softened slightly, a glimpse of the actual child beneath the calculated messenger. You already made your choice when you kept the money, when you came to the meeting, when you didn't go to the police or tell your friend what really happened Friday night. Everything since then has just been pretending you still have options you've already foreclosed. She was right. I'd known it Sunday morning. Had known it every moment since I'd hidden that envelope in my sock drawer instead of returning it or reporting it. I'd made my choice through a series of small actions that had seemed like postponing a decision but were actually decisions themselves. What does your father expect from me? The same thing you expect from yourself. To use your skills for something more interesting than reviewing questionable tax deductions for dry cleanesses. To get paid what you're actually worth instead of what some corporate structure decided was appropriate. To stop pretending you're satisfied with a life that's slowly suffocating you. I stared at this 9-year-old who spoke with the wisdom of someone much older, someone who'd seen enough of human nature to understand what motivated people. She'd been trained well by her father, taught to identify weaknesses and exploit them with surgical precision. The terrifying part was how right she was. Tell your father I'll call the number tonight. Sophia stood, smoothing down her school uniform with small hands. He'll be pleased. And Miss Mitchell, this work you'll be doing, it's actually important. People are stealing from my father, from our family businesses. That affects employees who depend on those jobs. Families who need the income. You'll be helping more than just my father by finding the truth. The justification was neat, practiced, probably something Marco had told her to say. But there was also truth in it. If people were embezzling from Valentini businesses, they were stealing from everyone employed by those businesses. My work would have consequences beyond helping a criminal identify traitors. That didn't make it right, but it made it less clearly wrong. After Sophia left, escorted by her watchful guardian, I returned to my cubicle and stared at the Hendricks account without seeing it. The decision I'd been pretending not to make was made. I would call Marco Valentini tonight. I would accept his offer. I would cross whatever lines necessary to escape the life that had become unbearable. And if that made me a criminal, at least I'd be a well-paid one. I called the number at 8 o'clock that evening, sitting on my couch with a glass of wine I'd poured for courage but hadn't touched. The phone rang twice before a voice I recognized answered. Miss Mitchell, I've been expecting your call. Marco Valentini sounded unsurprised, as if my acceptance had been inevitable from the moment his daughter handed me that business card. Maybe it had been. Maybe he'd read me so accurately that my decision was never really in question. Just a matter of time until I stopped pretending I had other options. I'm ready to proceed with the consultation, but I need to establish some boundaries first, of course. I appreciate professionals who understand the importance of clear parameters. I took a breath, steadying myself for a negotiation I had no experience conducting. I won't do anything that directly facilitates illegal activity. I'll review financial records for legitimate businesses only. I won't help launder money or hide criminal proceeds. And I won't testify against anyone or provide information to law enforcement. But I also won't lie under oath if somehow this ends up in court. There was a pause and I could almost hear him smiling. Those terms are acceptable. The businesses you'll be reviewing are completely legitimate. Restaurants, catering services, event venues, all properly licensed and taxed. If you find evidence of theft, that information is for my private use only. You won't be asked to participate in whatever resolution I choose. How will this work practically? I can't exactly carry boxes of financial records out of my apartment building without questions. You won't need to. I'm sending you a secure laptop with encrypted access to all relevant files. It will be delivered to your home tomorrow evening. The encryption ensures our communications can't be intercepted or traced. You'll work from home at your own pace and contact me through the laptop's secure messaging system when you have findings to report. The efficiency of the arrangement suggested he'd done this before, had systems in place for bringing outside consultants into his operations without leaving evidence trails. How many other accountants had sat on their couches making this same call, accepting offers they knew were wrong but couldn't refuse? One more thing, I said. If I find evidence of theft, you need to promise me that innocent employees won't suffer consequences. Whatever you do to the people actually responsible, fine. But I don't want to be the reason someone's assistant or bookkeeper loses their job because their boss was stealing. Marco's tone warmed with what sounded like genuine respect. That's a reasonable request. Any action I take will be directed at those actually responsible for the theft. You have my word, his word. I was trusting the word of a man whose business involved violence and intimidation and activities. I didn't want to think about too closely, but something in his tone suggested he took promises seriously. That in his world honor might actually mean something, even when laws didn't. Then we have an agreement. Excellent. The laptop will arrive tomorrow between 6 and 7. Take your time with the analysis. Quality matters more than speed. And Miss Mitchell, thank you for trusting me with your talents. I don't take that lightly. He ended the call before I could respond, leaving me staring at my phone and wondering what exactly I'd just committed myself to. The wine glass sat untouched, condensation pooling on my coffee table. I'd thought I'd need alcohol to get through this conversation, but instead I felt oddly clear-headed, calm, like I'd finally stopped fighting against a current and allowed myself to be carried toward whatever waited downstream. The laptop arrived exactly as promised, delivered by a professional courier service that had no idea what they were transporting. It came in a plain box with no return address, just a sealed envelope on top containing a single page of typed instructions. Power on the laptop. Wait for the encryption software to load. Use the provided credentials to log in. Do not attempt to access any other websites or application. Do not discuss this work with anyone. When you have findings to report, use the secure messaging application that will appear on the desktop. I set up the laptop on my kitchen table, the only surface large enough to spread out my own notes alongside the provided technology. The encryption software loaded with a progress bar that felt ominous, like I was opening a door that would never fully close again. When it finished, a login screen appeared with credentials already filled in. I just had to click enter. The desktop was sparse, containing only 3 applications: a secure messaging system, a document viewer, and a folder labeled simply Financial Records. I clicked on the folder and found myself looking at 3 years of financial data from what appeared to be 7 different businesses: 3 restaurants, 2 catering companies, an event venue, and a nightclub. All legitimate operations based in Chicago, all showing healthy profit margins and steady growth. I opened the first restaurant's records and immediately saw what Marco had meant about sophisticated theft. This wasn't someone skimming cash from registers or inflating supply costs. This was careful manipulation of accounts receivable, creating fake vendor invoices that were paid from legitimate accounts, then credited back through a series of transfers designed to look like normal business operation. Someone had embedded the theft deep in the structure of routine transactions, hiding it in plain sight among thousands of legitimate entries. My accountant brain lit up with the challenge. This was forensic work at its most complex, requiring pattern recognition and analytical thinking that went beyond standard auditing. I started building spreadsheets to track the questionable transactions, creating visualizations that would show the flow of money through accounts in ways that revealed the underlying theft. Hours passed without me noticing. When I finally looked up from the laptop, it was past midnight and my coffee had gone cold. But I'd identified at least 15 transactions in the first restaurant's records that showed clear signs of embezzlement. Someone was stealing approximately $30,000 per month, disguised through fake invoicing from vendors that probably didn't exist or were controlled by whoever was orchestrating this fraud. I opened the secure messaging application and typed my first report. Initial analysis of Valentini's Ristorante record shows evidence of systematic embezzlement. Fake vendor invoices totaling approximately $360,000 annually. Will provide detailed documentation when full analysis is complete. The response came within minutes. Excellent work. Continue with the other businesses. I suspect you'll find similar patterns. He was right. Over the next week, I spent every evening and weekend hunched over the encrypted laptop, tracking money through 7 different sets of financial record. The pattern was consistent across all of them. Fake vendor invoices, carefully timed to match periods of high legitimate activity when accountants would be less likely to scrutinize individual transactions. The theft was systematic, professional, and totaled over $2 million annually across all 7 businesses. More impressively, it was all being orchestrated by the same person. The fake vendors were different, the timing varied, but the underlying structure of the fraud was identical. Someone with access to all 7 businesses, someone trusted enough that their invoices weren't questioned, was systematically stealing from Marco Valentini and covering their tracks with the kind of sophisticated knowledge that suggested either accounting training or long experience with financial system. By Friday evening, I'd built a complete case documenting the theft, spreadsheets showing transaction patterns, vendor analysis revealing the fake companies, even a timeline that demonstrated the escalation of the embezzlement over 3 years. It was the kind of forensic accounting work I'd dreamed of doing for the FBI, except I was doing it for a mob boss to help him identify a traitor in his organization. The implications of what I was providing sat heavy in my mind. This information would lead to someone being punished, maybe legally through prosecution and prison, maybe illegally through whatever justice looked like in Marco Valentini's world. I was enabling that punishment through my analysis. I couldn't pretend otherwise. I uploaded my complete findings through the secure system and sent a message. Analysis complete. Have identified source of embezzlement across all 7 businesses. Total theft approximately $2.1 million over 3 years. Detailed documentation attached. The response took longer this time. Nearly an hour passed before the messaging system chimed with Marco's reply. Outstanding work. This confirms suspicions I've held for months. Can you come to my office tomorrow evening? I'd like to discuss your findings in person and provide your payment. Tomorrow was Saturday. A normal person would spend it doing laundry or meeting friends for brunch or engaging in any of the mundane activities that filled weekends. Instead, I'd be meeting with a crime boss to deliver evidence that would probably result in someone's death. The thought should have kept me awake, but I slept better that night than I had in months, maybe because I'd finally stopped pretending to be someone I wasn't. The next evening, I returned to the warehouse building where this had all begun. The same suited guard met me at the elevator, escorting me up to the penthouse that managed to be both elegant and intimidating. Marco waited near the windows, the city lights creating a backdrop that made him look like a figure from a movie about organized crime. Except this was real. The money I'd be collecting was real. The consequences of my work were real. "Miss Mitchell," he said, gesturing to the same seating area where we'd first discussed this arrangement. "Your analysis exceeded my expectation. The detail, the clarity of your presentation, the way you tracked patterns that 3 different accountants missed. This is exceptional work." He handed me another envelope, significantly thicker than the first. Inside were neat bands of $100 bills totaling $200,000. More money than I'd earned in 3 years at Morrison & Associates. More money than I'd ever imagined. Holding payment for 2 weeks of evening work that had been more intellectually satisfying than anything I'd done in my legitimate career. "I need to know something," I said, the envelope heavy in my hands. "What happens to the person who was stealing from you?" Marco's expression remained neutral. "Does it matter?" "It might. I helped you identify them. I should understand the consequence." He was quiet for a moment, considering how much to share. "The person responsible is someone I trusted for 7 years. Someone who's been with my family since they were 19 years old. Who I promoted to positions of increasing responsibility because I believed in their loyalty. That betrayal requires a response that sends a message to others in my organization, so you'll kill them. I'll give them a choice. Repay what they've stolen with interest, leave the city and never return. Or face consequences that would be significantly more permanent. Most people choose exile when given the option." The answer should have horrified me, but instead I felt something like relief. Marco Valentini was many things, but he wasn't needlessly cruel. He understood that violence was sometimes necessary, but not always preferable. That pragmatism often served better than brutality. "Thank you for being honest with me." "Honesty is rare in my world," Marco said, pouring 2 glasses of wine without asking if I wanted one. "Most people tell me what they think I want to hear. You ask questions that matter, even when the answers might be uncomfortable." I accepted the wine, surprised to find it was the same Pinot Grigio I'd ordered that first night at the restaurant. He'd remembered, or more likely had someone research every detail about me, including my drinking preferences. The attention to detail was both flattering and unsettling. "What happens now?" I asked. "I've completed the work you hired me for. Do we just go our separate ways?" "That depends. Do you want to go back to reviewing tax returns for people trying to write off Hawaiian vacation? Or would you be interested in additional consulting opportunity?" I should have said no. Should have taken my $220,000 and disappeared back into my safe, boring life. Paid off my debts, built a savings account, maybe even quit Morrison & Associates to find something more fulfilling within the bounds of legality. That's what the person I used to be would have done. What kind of opportunities? Marco settled into the chair across from me, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp with calculation. "I have business interests beyond these 7 established. Some partners I trust complete, others I'm less certain about. Having someone with your skills available for periodic reviews would provide valuable peace of mind. Not full-time employment, just occasional projects when situations warrant investigation. You want me on retainer. I want access to your expertise when I need it. In exchange, I'd pay you a monthly consulting fee, $20,000 whether I use your services that month or not. Additional payment for specific projects based on complexity and time required. $20,000 a month. That was more than I made in 3 months at my legitimate job. It was financial security beyond anything I'd imagined possible. It was also permanent entanglement with Marco Valentini's world, transforming me from someone who'd taken one questionable job into someone who worked regularly for organized crime. I need time to think about it, of course. But while you're thinking, consider this. You have a gift for seeing patterns others miss. That gift is being wasted on work that doesn't challenge you, doesn't compensate you appropriately, and doesn't make any real difference in the world. What I'm offering is a chance to use your talents fully while building the kind of financial foundation that creates real freedom." He was right, and we both knew it. The work I'd done over the past 2 weeks had been more engaging than anything I'd experienced in 7 years at Morrison & Associates. I'd gone to bed thinking about transaction patterns and woken up eager to continue the analysis. I'd felt useful, challenged, respected in ways my legitimate career had never provided. "I'll think about it," I repeated, standing to leave, "and I'll let you know." Marco stood as well, and for a moment we were close enough that I could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle that probably cost more than my rent. Take the time you need, but know that my offer comes with protection as well as pain. People in my organization would understand you're under my personal guarantee of safety. That's worth considering, given that you now know details about my business that some might find valuable. The implicit threat was delivered so smoothly I almost missed it, except it wasn't really a threat. It was a statement of fact. I'd seen financial records, identified patterns, learned names and details that could be dangerous in the wrong context. Working for Marco regularly meant being protected by his reputation. Walking away meant being a loose end, someone with knowledge but no loyalty to ensure my silence. "I understand," I said quietly, "and I appreciate your directness." The guard escorted me back to the elevator, but this time Marco walked with us. Before the doors closed, he handed me a phone. It was new, expensive, definitely not something I could have afforded on my accountant's salary. My personal number is programmed in. The phone is encrypted, untraceable. Use it if you need to reach me for any reason. "And Miss Mitchell?" Welcome to the family." The elevator doors closed on his slight smile, leaving me alone with a phone that represented another step away from the person I used to be. Family, not employees or contractors or assets. Family. The word carried weight in his world, applied obligations and protections that extended beyond simple business relationship. I drove home in a daze, the envelope of cash in my purse, the encrypted phone in my pocket, my mind racing through implications I couldn't fully process. My apartment looked exactly as I'd left it, but I felt like a different person entering familiar space. The bills stacked on my counter that had seemed so overwhelming this morning now looked manageable. The studio that had felt cramped and depressing now looked like a temporary situation I could change whenever I wanted. I deposited the cash in 3 different safe deposit boxes over the next week, spreading it across banks to avoid questions about large deposits. Paid off 4 credit cards completely, the satisfaction of zeroing those balances almost overwhelming. Paid ahead 3 months on my rent. Set aside money for taxes I'd probably never report, because how do you explain sudden wealth to the IRS without revealing its source? My life at Morrison & Associates continued its mundane routine, but I moved through it like an actor playing a role, reviewing tax returns, attending meetings about quarterly projections, listening to Craig drone on about professional development opportunities. None of it felt real anymore. I was just performing the motions of being an accountant while knowing I'd already moved beyond that identity into something I couldn't fully name. Rachel noticed the change over their weekly lunch. "You seem different lately. Happier, maybe. Like something good happened that you're not telling me about. Just feeling better about things. I picked up some freelance work like I mentioned. The extra money's helping. That's great. Though you're being awfully mysterious about these private clients. Confidentiality agreements," I explained, the lie coming easier each time. "Some wealthy people are paranoid about their financial information being discussed. I signed NDAs that would bankrupt me if I violated them." Rachel accepted this explanation because it sounded plausible, because she trusted me, because she had no reason to suspect her accountant friend was working for organized crime. The ease of the deception bothered me less than it should have. I was developing skills I'd never needed before, learning to maintain separate versions of myself for different contexts. The encrypted phone sat in my purse for 3 weeks before I finally called Marco's number. He answered immediately as if he'd been waiting. "I've thought about your offer. I'm interested in the retainer arrangement, but I need guarantees." "Name them." "I continue my legitimate job at Morrison & Associates. It provides cover and keeps questions from arising about my income sources. I only take on projects that involve reviewing legal businesses, nothing that crosses into obviously criminal activity. And if I ever want to walk away, you let me go without consequences." There was a pause, and I imagined him considering my terms, calculating whether they were acceptable or revealed weakness he could exploit. "Agreed on all points except the last. You can walk away whenever you choose, but some knowledge can't be unknown. If you leave, you do so with the understanding that my protection continues as long as your silence does. Betray what you've learned and protection becomes something else entirely." "That's fair. Then we have an agreement. Your first monthly payment will arrive tomorrow. I'll contact you when I need your services." The payment arrived by courier, another envelope of cash that I added to my growing collection in safe deposit boxes. Over the next 3 months, Marco called on me twice. Once to review acquisition documents for a restaurant he was considering purchasing, analyzing whether the financial projections were realistic or fraudulent. Once to audit a catering company after he suspected the manager of skimming profits. Both projects were straightforward, intellectually engaging, and paid considerably more than my monthly retainer. I was becoming good at living 2 lives. Professional accountant by day, forensic consultant for organized crime by night. The boundaries between these identities blurred gradually until I stopped thinking of them as separate people. They were both me, different facets of someone who'd learned that morality was more complicated than I'd been taught. Then Sophia appeared at my apartment building on a Thursday evening in December. She stood in the lobby when I came home from work, her school uniform replaced by an expensive winter coat and boots that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. The woman who accompanied her, the same guardian from her office visit, stood nearby with watchful eyes. "Miss Mitchell," Sophia said with her usual precocious formality, "my father needs your help with something urgent. Could you come with us?" The casual way she phrased it as a request when we both knew it wasn't made me smile despite my concern. "Kinda help. Someone is threatening our family. My father thinks you might be able to help identify who." The drive took us to a different location than Marco's warehouse penthouse. This was a restaurant, one of the establishments I'd reviewed in my original analysis. Valentini's Ristorante closed for the evening despite it being prime dinner hours. Marco waited inside, his usual composed demeanor edged with tension I'd never seen before. "Someone sent this to my daughter's school." He handed me a plain envelope containing a single photograph. It showed Sophia leaving school, taken from across the street with a telephoto lens. On the back, someone had written in block letters, "Your family isn't as protected as you think." The violation of using a child to send a message made my blood run cold. This wasn't business. This was personal, designed to frighten in ways that transcended normal criminal rivalry. "I need you to look at something," Marco said, leading me to a private office in the back of the restaurant. "Over the past month, I've received 3 anonymous messages about problems in my businesses. Specific problems that only someone with deep knowledge of my operations would know. I think whoever sent this photograph is the same person sending the messages, and I think they've had access to financial information that should be secured. He showed me the messages on his phone. 3 texts from an unknown number, each revealing information that should have been known only to Marco's inner circle. Details about a cash transfer to a Miami partner, a meeting location that had been changed at the last minute. Most damning, a reference to the embezzlement investigation I'd conducted, mentioning amounts and time frames that matched my findings exactly. Someone with access to your encrypted communications sent these, I said, studying the messages with growing unease. Or someone close enough to you that they're overhearing private conversation. That's what concerns. I've already had my security team sweep for electronic surveillance. The warehouse is clean, this restaurant is clean, my home is clean, which means the leak is human, not technological. He pulled up financial records on a laptop, the same encrypted system I'd been using for my consulting work. These are access logs for our secure server. Every time someone opens a file, reviews a document, or sends a message through our system, it's recorded here. I need you to analyze the patterns and tell me if anyone's accessing information they shouldn't have. I settled into the chair and began scrolling through months of access logs. The data was extensive, showing dozens of users across Marco's organization accessing various files and communications. Most of it appeared routine, people reviewing information relevant to their roles. But as I built a spreadsheet to track access patterns against actual job responsibilities, anomalies began to emerge. Someone using credentials belonging to a man named Vincent had been accessing financial records from all 7 businesses I'd originally audited. That might have been normal if Vincent was a CFO or controller, but according to the organizational chart Marco provided, Vincent was head of security. He had no legitimate reason to be reviewing restaurant profit and loss statements or catering company invoices. More concerning, Vincent's access pattern showed him opening files shortly after I'd uploaded my reports. He'd reviewed my embezzlement analysis within hours of submission, had accessed the acquisition documents I'd evaluated, had even opened communications between Marco and me discussing payment terms. Vincent Caruso, I said quietly, you're head of security. He's been accessing financial information that has nothing to do with security operations, and he's been reading communications between us. Marco's expression hardened into something cold and dangerous. Vincent has been with my family for 12 years. He worked for my father before me. His loyalty has never been questioned. Then someone is using his credentials, or his loyalty isn't what you believe. I showed Marco the spreadsheet I'd built, highlighting the suspicious access pattern. The evidence was circumstantial but compelling. Someone was systematically monitoring information that should have been restricted, and that someone had credentials belonging to the man responsible for protecting Marco's family. Can you tell when these accesses occurred, specific times and dates? I filtered the data, creating a timeline. The pattern that emerged was even more damning. Vincent's credentials had been used to access sensitive files during hours when he was supposedly off duty, the times when he'd been logged in the physical security system as having left the warehouse. Either he was remotely accessing files from home, or someone else was using his login information with his knowledge. 3 a.m. access times, I said, pointing to multiple entries. Unless your head of security is an insomniac who likes to review financial reports in the middle of the night, someone else is using his account. Or Vincent is feeding information to someone and doing it when he thinks no one will notice. Marco pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking rapid Italian that I couldn't follow but understood was urgent. Within minutes, 2 men arrived at the restaurant. He gave them instructions in English this time, his tone leaving no room for question. Bring Vincent here. Don't tell him why. Don't give him time to make calls or send messages. Just bring him now. After the men left, Marco turned back to me. His usual composed demeanor had shifted into something else, something that reminded me exactly who I was working for and what he was capable of when betrayed. If Vincent is responsible for threatening Sophia, I said carefully, what will you do to him? What I do to anyone who threatens my family? Marco's voice carried no emotion, but his eyes held the kind of cold fury that made my skin prickle with instinctive fear. He'll be given one chance to explain. If his explanation satisfies me, he lives. If it doesn't, he won't see tomorrow. The casual certainty of violence should have horrified me. Instead, I felt something unexpected, anger on Sophia's behalf. A 9-year-old girl should be able to go to school without being photographed by people sending threats. She should be worried about homework and friends, not about whether her father's enemies would use her as leverage. I want to be here when you question him, I said, surprising myself. If Vincent tries to lie, I can identify the tells. Body language, micro-expressions, the kind of behavioral analysis that reveals deception. You want to participate in an interrogation? I want to protect Sophia. She shouldn't have to be afraid because someone is trying to hurt you through her. Something shifted in Marco's expression, a softening around the edges that looked almost like respect. You've become invested in my family. He was right. Somewhere between that first meeting and this moment, I'd stopped thinking of the Valentines as abstract concepts, criminal figures from a world separate from my own. Sophia had become real to me. A precocious child who deserved protection despite the circumstances of her birth. And Marco had become more than just an employer. He'd become someone whose trust I valued, whose approval mattered in ways I didn't want to examine too closely. Vincent arrived 30 minutes later, escorted by the two men who'd clearly given him no opportunity to refuse or prepare. He was mid-40s, built like someone who spent time in gyms, with the kind of alert awareness that came from years in security work. When he saw Marco waiting with obvious tension, his expression shifted from confusion to concern. "Marco, what's going on? Did something happen?" "Sit," Marco said, gesturing to a chair. "We need to discuss your computer access pattern." Vincent sat, his body language showing confusion rather than guilt. "My access patterns? I don't understand. Over the past 3 months, your credentials have been used to access financial records you have no legitimate reason to review. Files containing sensitive information about my business operations and personal communications." Vincent's confusion appeared genuine. "That's impossible. I haven't accessed anything beyond security protocols and personnel files. Someone must have stolen my credentials." I stepped forward, watching his reactions carefully. 3 a.m. on November 8th, 4:15 a.m. on December 2nd. Multiple instances of late-night access to restricted files. "Were you working those hours?" "No. I was home. I'm never in the office at those hours unless there's an emergency." His micro-expressions supported his words. Genuine surprise when confronted with specific times. No defensive posturing or aggressive denial that often accompanied guilt. Either Vincent was an exceptional liar or he was telling the truth about not accessing those files. "Does anyone else know your password?" Marco asked, his tone dangerous despite the simple question. Vincent hesitated, and in that hesitation I saw the truth before he spoke it. "My son, Antonio. He's been having financial troubles, gambling debts. I let him use my computer a few times when he visited the warehouse. He said he needed to check his email, look at job postings. I didn't think anything of it because he never left my office." Marco's expression turned cold. "Your son has access to our secure systems." "I never gave him my password," Vincent said quickly. "But he's smart with technology. He could have watched me type it or installed something on my computer to capture my credentials. I swear I didn't know he was accessing restricted files." I pulled up my laptop and showed Vincent the access logs. "These are times your credentials were used. Do they correspond with your son's visits?" Vincent reviewed the dates, his face draining of color. "Yes. Those match when Antonio came to see me. He said he was trying to get his life together, wanted advice about finding legitimate work. I thought I was helping him." The pain in Vincent's voice was genuine. He'd been betrayed by his own son, used as an unwitting access point to information that had been weaponized against Marco's family. Quote, "The realization was destroying him in real time." "Where is Antonio now?" Marco asked, his tone flat and emotionless in a way that made my blood run cold. "I don't know. They stopped answering my calls 3 weeks ago. I thought he was embarrassed about his debts. Didn't want to face me. But now I understand he was avoiding me because he knew what he'd done." Marco pulled out his phone and made another call, speaking in Italian again. When he finished, he turned back to Vincent with an expression I couldn't read. "Your son has sold information about my operations to competitors, has compromised my security, has threatened my daughter to pressure me. That betrayal extends to you, whether you knew about it or not." Vincent's face crumbled. "Marco, please. He's my son. He's made terrible mistakes, but he's still my son. And Sophia is my daughter. When I find Antonio, he will answer for what he's done. As for you, your employment ends tonight. I'm not sure I can trust you after this, even if your involvement was innocent." "I understand," Vincent said quietly. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I failed you and I failed my son by not seeing what he was becoming." After Vincent left, escorted out by the same men who'd brought him in, Marco turned to me with weary eyes. "Thank you for your help. Your analysis was exactly what I needed. What will you do to Antonio when you find him? What I do to anyone who threatens my family. But first, I need to find him. And that's where I'm hoping you can help again." "How exactly am I supposed to help you find someone?" I asked. "I'm an accountant, not a private investigator." Marco pulled up a chair beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "You find people through their money. Everyone leaves a trail when they spend. Credit cards, bank transfers, cash withdrawals. Antonio has gambling debts, which means he's desperate for money. Desperate people make mistakes, leave patterns that someone with your skills can identify." He handed me another laptop, this one showing what appeared to be Antonio's financial records going back 6 months. Marco's resources were truly frightening. He'd obtained complete banking information, credit card statements, even cash advance records from payday loan companies. Every transaction Antonio had made was laid out for analysis. "How did you get all of this?" Marco's slight smile suggested the question was naive. "I have people who specialize in obtaining information. What matters is that you now have everything you need to tell me where Antonio will be and when." I studied the records, building a picture of a man drowning in debt and increasingly desperate measures to stay afloat. Gambling losses at various casinos, always at night, always escalating amounts. Payday loans taken from predatory lenders at interest rates that should be criminal. Cash advances on credit cards that were already maxed out. Antonio Caruso was in a financial death spiral, the kind where every attempt to solve the problem only made it worse. But there was a pattern emerging. Antonio had a routine, visiting the same casino every Thursday night. always withdrawing $200 from an ATM inside the building at approximately 9 p.m. It was the behavior of someone with a compulsion they couldn't control, returning to the source of their destruction with mechanical regularity. He'll be at the Riverside Casino Thursday night, I said, highlighting the pattern. 9 p.m. like clockwork. He's been there every Thursday for the past 3 months without fail. Marco nodded slowly. That gives us 2 days. Enough time to prepare. The certainty in his voice made my stomach clench. Prepare for what exactly? To have a conversation with Antonio about the choices he's made and the consequences that follow? I should have left it there. Should have provided my analysis and stepped back from whatever was about to happen. But I'd seen that photograph of Sophia, had watched Vincent's face crumble as he realized his son's betrayal. Some part of me wanted to see this through, to ensure that threats against a 9-year-old girl didn't go unanswered. I want to be there Thursday night. Marco turned to look at me fully, those dark eyes searching my face. This isn't like reviewing financial records from a safe distance. This is direct involvement in something that could become violent. Are you certain you want to cross that line? The question hung between us, heavy with implications. Everything up to this point had been deniable. I'd reviewed documents, identified patterns, provided analysis that could be explained as legitimate consulting work if anyone ever asked, but participating in the actual confrontation of someone who'd threatened a child, being present when Marco delivered whatever justice he deemed appropriate, that was different. That was choosing to fully enter his world in ways I couldn't take back. I'm certain something shifted in his expression, a warmth that softened the dangerous edge. You continue to surprise me, Miss Mitchell. Most people in your position would be looking for ways to distance themselves. You keep moving closer instead. Maybe I'm tired of being distant from things that matter. And this matters to you? My family's safety? I thought about Sophia's old eyes and practiced politeness, a child being groomed for a world she hadn't chosen but would have to navigate. I thought about Marco's careful honor, his willingness to offer choices even to people who'd betrayed him. This family was complicated, morally compromised, living by rules I'd been taught to reject. But they were also real people trying to protect each other in a world that offered few guarantees of safety. Yes, it matters. Marco's hand found mine where it rested on the table, his fingers warm and surprisingly gentle. Thank you for your help, for your loyalty, for choosing to be part of this despite everything it costs you. The touch lasted only moments before he pulled away, returning to professional distance. But something had shifted between us, an acknowledgement of connection that went beyond employer and consultant. I was becoming part of his world in ways that had nothing to do with money or obligation. Thursday arrived with the kind of nervous energy that made my regular work impossible. I went through the motions at Morrison and Associates, attending meetings and reviewing files without retaining any of it. Craig asked if I was feeling well. I claimed a headache, which wasn't entirely a lie. My head throbbed with the weight of decisions I'd made and the situation I'd be walking into that evening. Rachel called during lunch, her voice concerned. Are you okay? You've been weird lately. Distant. I feel like I barely see you anymore. Just busy with work. The freelance consulting has been taking up a lot of evening hours. Is the money worth it? You sound stressed. I looked at my bank account balance on my phone, the number that had seemed impossible 6 months ago. The money was absolutely worth it, but the cost wasn't financial. It was measured in the distance growing between who I'd been and who I was becoming, in the ease with which deception now came to me, in my willingness to participate in actions I'd once have condemned without hesitation. Yeah, it's worth it. We made tentative plans for dinner the following week, plans I had no idea if I'd keep. My life with Rachel, with my co-workers, with anyone from my previous existence felt increasingly like a performance. The real me existed in encrypted messages and cash payments and late-night analysis of criminal financial patterns. Marco sent a car for me at 8 p.m. The driver was one of his usual security team, a man who'd escorted me multiple times but never spoken beyond polite greeting. We drove to a building 2 blocks from the Riverside Casino, an office space that appeared abandoned but was actually another of Marco's properties. He waited inside with 3 other men I didn't recognize, all dressed casually enough to blend into a casino crowd. The plan is simple, Marco explained when I arrived. Antonio will enter the casino at approximately 9. He'll go to the ATM, withdraw his usual $200, then head to the poker tables on the 2nd floor. We'll intercept him before he reaches the tables, invite him outside for a conversation. He'll be positioned near the ATM, watching for any sign he suspects something is wrong. If he runs, you signal which direction. He handed me a small earpiece similar to what his security team wore. This keeps you connected to us. Don't try to stop him yourself if he runs. Just tell us where he's going. I fitted the earpiece, testing the connection. My heart hammered against my ribs with an anxiety that felt electric. This was real. I was about to participate in something that could end with violence, with someone being hurt or killed because of information I'd provided. The enormity of that responsibility should have sent me running. Instead, it made me feel intensely alive in ways my safe, regulated life never had. We walked to the casino separately, entering at different times to avoid appearing as a group. The Riverside was exactly what I expected from a Chicago gambling establishment. Carpet that had seen better decades, slot machines creating a cacophony of electronic sounds and the permanent smell of cigarette smoke and desperation. I positioned myself near the ATM bank in the main lobby, pretending to check my phone while watching the entrance. Antonio arrived at 9:03, 3 minutes behind his usual schedule. He looked like a man operating on fumes, eyes shadowed with exhaustion, clothes that had been expensive once but now looked slept in. The gambling addiction had carved away everything vital, leaving someone who moved with the mechanical purpose of an addict serving their compulsion. He approached the ATM closest to me, and I saw his hands shaking as he inserted his card. The withdrawal was denied. He tried again with the same result. Then a third time, his frustration visible in the way his shoulders tensed. The accounts I'd reviewed had shown he was maxed out on every credit line, overdrawn on his checking account. He'd come to feed his addiction with money he didn't have. Targeted ATM, looks like his funds are depleted, I whispered into the earpiece. He's getting agitated. We're moving in, Marco's voice responded, calm and controlled. I watched as Marco and his men approached from different angles, boxing Antonio in without making it obvious. Marco said something I couldn't hear, and Antonio's face went pale. He glanced around, clearly considering whether to run, but the positioning of Marco's team made escape unlikely. Instead, he nodded once and allowed himself to be guided toward a side exit. Follow at a distance, Marco's voice came through the earpiece. We're taking him to the car. I trailed behind, maintaining enough space that casual observers wouldn't connect us. They led Antonio to a black SUV in the parking garage, and I climbed into a second vehicle that pulled up behind them. The short drive back to Marco's building felt longer than it was, tension making every minute stretch. The building's interior had been transformed since my last visit. What had been an empty office space now contained a single chair in the center of the room, harsh overhead lighting creating dramatic shadows. Antonio sat in that chair, his hands secured behind him with zip ties, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature. Marco stood a few feet away, his posture relaxed but radiating the kind of controlled danger that made the air feel heavy. I positioned myself near the doorway, far enough back that Antonio might not immediately notice me, close enough to observe his reaction. Marco had asked me to watch for deception patterns, to help determine if Antonio was being truthful about who he'd been selling information to and why. Antonio Caruso, Marco began, his voice carrying perfect calm. You've been accessing my secure systems using your father's credentials, stealing information about my business operations, selling that information to my competitors, and threatening my daughter to create leverage. I need you to explain why you thought any of this was acceptable. Antonio's breathing accelerated, visible panic setting in. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just needed money. The gambling debts were crushing me, and I thought I could make quick cash by selling some basic information. Nothing that would really hurt you. Marco's expression didn't change. You sent a photograph of my 9-year-old daughter with a threatening message. How is that basic information? That wasn't me. I swear I didn't send that picture. I gave information to someone who said they just wanted business intelligence for competitive purposes. I didn't know they'd use it to threaten your family. I studied Antonio's micro-expressions as he spoke, the rapid eye movements, the way his voice pitched higher on certain words, the involuntary swallowing between sentences. He was terrified, yes, but he was also lying. Not about everything, but about something significant. He's lying about the photograph, I said quietly. His stress responses spike when he mentions it. He knows more than he's saying. Marco turned to look at me, then back at Antonio. My consultant says you're not being honest about the photograph. You'd like to reconsider your answer? Antonio's face crumbled, tears streaming down his cheeks. Okay. I was there when they discussed sending it. I told them where Sophia went to school, what time she'd be leaving, but I didn't take the picture myself. I just provided the information. I thought it was just to scare you, to make you negotiate. I didn't think they'd actually hurt her. Who are they? Marco's voice remained eerily calm, but his hands had curled into fists at his sides. The Castellanos, they're trying to move into your territory and they needed leverage. Been feeding them information for 6 months, meeting locations, financial details, personnel structures. They paid well, and I thought it was just business intelligence. But then they started asking about your family, about Sophia. I should have stopped, but I owed them money They said the debt would be forgiven if I helped them with one more thing. The Castellanos were a rival organization, one Marco had been in conflict with for years over various business territories. This wasn't just Antonio's gambling addiction spiraling out of control. This was espionage, a systematic effort by a competing family to undermine Marco's operations using a desperate man as their access point. How much did they pay you? I asked, stepping forward. For 6 months of information, how much? Antonio hesitated, shame coloring his features. 75,000 total. Most of it went directly to casinos or to pay off the loan sharks who'd threatened to break my legs. I have maybe 5,000 left. The pathetic reality of his situation crystallized. Antonio had betrayed his father's employer, endangered a child, and sold information that could have gotten people killed, all for money that disappeared into gambling losses almost as fast as he received it. He destroyed his life and threatened others for nothing of lasting value. Marco pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking Italian in tones that suggested he was coordinating something significant. When he finished, he turned back to Antonio with an expression that made my blood run cold. The Castellanos will learn tonight that using my daughter as leverage was a fatal mistake. As for you, You've presented me with an interesting problem. Your father served my family faithfully for 12 years. That loyalty should count for something, even when his son lacks the same character. But you've committed betrayals that normally would end only one way. Please, Antonio sobbed. I know I fucked up. I know I destroyed everything. Just let me disappear. I'll leave Chicago, change my name, never come back. You'll never hear from me again. Marco considered this for a long moment. You'll give me detailed information about every meeting with the Castellano. Names, locations, what you discussed, what information you provided, everything. Then you'll leave Chicago tonight and never return. If you ever contact your father, if you ever set foot in this city again, if you ever speak to anyone about what you've seen or heard, you won't live long enough to regret it. I'll tell you everything. I swear. Just please don't kill me. Over the next hour, Antonio provided details that Marco recorded on his phone, meeting locations at various restaurants and bars, names of Castellano family members he'd dealt with, specific information he'd stolen and when he delivered it. The picture that emerged was damaging, revealing how much the Castellanos knew about Marcos's operations, but it also provided targeting information, showing exactly who within their organization had been coordinating the intelligence gathering. When Antonio finished, Marco's men untied him and escorted him to a car that would take him to the bus station with enough cash to get him out of Illinois. It was more mercy than he deserved, granted only because of Vincent's years of loyal service. After Antonio left, Marco turned to me with exhaustion evident in his eyes. Thank you for your help. Your ability to identify when he was lying made that interrogation much more efficient. What happens now with the Castellanos? Now I demonstrate that threatening my daughter carries consequences they won't forget. He pulled out his phone again, showing me a message he'd apparently sent while Antonio was providing information. It was a photograph of Antonio in the chair, terrified and crying, with a message in Italian that Marco translated. You sent threats to my child. Consider this your only warning. The Castellanos would understand the message. Marco had captured their intelligence asset, extracted all useful information, and was now sending a clear signal that their strategy had failed. More than that, he'd shown them exactly how much he knew about their operations through the details Antonio had provided. Will there be violence? I asked, not certain I wanted to know the answer. There will be a reckoning, but it will be targeted at those responsible for the decision to threaten Sofia. The Castellano family leadership will learn that some lines should never be crossed. His phone buzzed with a message and his expression softened slightly. Sofia wants to thank you personally for helping keep her safe. Would you come to dinner this weekend? At my home rather than a restaurant. She's been practicing her cooking skills and wants to show off. The invitation surprised me. This was crossing another boundary, being welcomed into Marco's personal space rather than just his business operations. Meeting his daughter in a context that had nothing to do with work or threats or the criminal enterprises that funded their lifestyle, I'd be honored. Saturday evening found me driving to an address in one of Chicago's most exclusive neighborhoods where old money lived behind gates and privacy hedges. Marco's home was exactly what I expected, a restored Victorian mansion that managed to be both elegant and fortress-like. Security cameras were discreetly positioned around the property, and I counted at least 3 men stationed at various points who pretended not to be watching everything. Sofia answered the door herself, wearing a simple dress and an apron that was comically oversized on her small frame. Miss Mitchell, welcome. I've made lasagna from my grandmother's recipe. I hope you're hungry. The interior of the house was warm and lived in, a stark contrast to the austere elegance of Marco's business properties. Photographs lined the hallways showing Sofia at various ages. Marco with an older couple who must have been his parents. Family gatherings that looked surprisingly normal. This was a home where people actually lived, not just a showplace for impressing associates. Marco appeared from the kitchen, also wearing an apron and looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen him. Welcome to our chaos. Sofia insisted on cooking tonight with minimal supervision. I'd been relegated to assistant chef. Dinner was surprisingly pleasant. Sofia's lasagna was actually good, the sauce rich with herbs and the pasta cooked perfectly. We ate at a table that felt designed for family meals, not formal dinners. The conversation flowed easily, touching on Sofia's school projects, a book Marco was reading, my thoughts on a recent news article about cryptocurrency regulation. It felt surreal, sitting here with a mob boss and his daughter, discussing normal topics like we were ordinary people. But maybe that was the point. They were ordinary people who happened to exist in extraordinary circumstances. Sofia was just a smart girl who loved cooking and asked too many questions. Marco was just a father trying to protect his family while managing businesses that crossed legal and illegal boundaries. After dinner, while Sofia cleared dishes with determined independence, Marco and I sat in his study with wine that probably cost more than my monthly rent used to. The room was lined with books, real books that showed signs of being read rather than decorator pieces. You've become important to my family, Marco said quietly. Sofia talks about you with admiration. She sees you as someone who uses intelligence rather than intimidation to solve problems. That's rare in our world. She's a remarkable kid. You're raising her well despite the circumstances. The circumstances are what they are. I didn't choose this life, I inherited it, but I'm trying to give Sofia choices I never had. Education, opportunities, the chance to walk away if she decides this world isn't what she wants. And if she chooses to stay, to follow in your footsteps, then I'll teach her to survive with honor, to be strong without being cruel, to understand that power comes with responsibility to protect those who can't protect themselves. The conversation about honor and power was interrupted by Sophia returning from the kitchen, her apron removed and her expression serious beyond her years. Miss Mitchell, may I ask you something personal? Of course. Are you happy working with my father? Not the money part, but the actual work. Does it make you feel like you're doing something that matters? The question caught me off guard with its directness and insight. Sophia had inherited her father's ability to cut through superficial answers to reach truth. I considered my response carefully, knowing that honesty mattered to both of them. I spent 7 years doing work that was technically respectable but felt meaningless. Reviewing tax returns, processing financial reports, helping people who already had money hold on to slightly more of it. It was safe and boring and slowly suffocating me. Working with your father, I'm using skills I'd forgotten I had, solving puzzles that actually challenge. And yes, it feels like it matters even if the circumstances are complicated. Sophia nodded with satisfaction, as if I'd confirmed something she'd already suspected. Good. My father needs people around him who are smart, enough to help him make good decisions. People who aren't just scared or greedy, but actually care about doing things right. After she headed upstairs to finish homework, Marco refilled our wine glasses and studied me with those dark eyes that seemed to see more than I wanted to reveal. She's right, you know. You've become more than just a consultant. You've become someone I trust, which is dangerous for both of us. Why dangerous? Because trust creates vulnerability. People I trust can hurt me more deeply than enemies. And because I find myself wanting to trust you with more than just financial analysis, the air between us felt charged with unspoken possibilities. We were sitting in his study, wine glasses catching lamplight, the house quiet around us except for distant sounds of Sophia moving around upstairs. This was crossing yet another line, acknowledging that whatever existed between us had evolved beyond professional boundaries into something personal. What are you saying, Marco? That I'd like you to consider working with me exclusive. Not occasional consulting, but a permanent position managing all financial operations for my legitimate businesses. It would mean leaving Morrison and Associates, stepping fully into my world. The pay would be substantial, the work challenging, and you'd be protected by my family's reputation. But it would also mean accepting who I am and what I do without reservation. The offer hung between us, weighted with implications far beyond employment terms. This was an invitation to fully embrace the life I'd been tentatively exploring, to stop pretending I had one foot in my old world when I'd already moved almost entirely into his. Before I could answer, his phone buzzed with an urgent message. He read it quickly, his expression hardening. The Castellanos have responded to my warning. They want to meet tomorrow to discuss terms. It seems they've decided threatening my daughter was poor strategy after all. What kind of terms? Territory boundaries, profit sharing on overlapping operation, the usual negotiations that happen when families realize war would be more costly than cooperation. They're offering peace, which means they understood my message about consequences. Over the next week, I watched Marco navigate complex negotiations with the Castellano family. I wasn't directly involved in the meetings, but I provided analysis of their financial proposal, helping Marco understand whether their offers were genuine or concealed traps. The work was fascinating, using my accounting skills to decode strategy and intention hidden in spreadsheets and contract terms. The final agreement included the Castellanos paying substantial compensation for their intelligence operation against Marcos' family. That money, Marco told me over dinner at Valentini's Ristorante, would go into a trust fund for Sophia. Insurance against future threats, protection that would follow her even if something happened to him. It was during that dinner in the same restaurant where our unlikely connection had begun that I made my decision. I'm giving notice at Morrison and Associates on Monday. I want to accept your offer to manage your legitimate business operations. Marco's smile was genuine, reaching his eyes in ways his professional expressions never did. I'm glad. You belong here, not trapped in some corporate cubicle pretending to care about other people's tax deduction. He was right. I've been pretending for years, playing a role I thought I was supposed to want while slowly dying inside. This world Marco offered was morally complicated, sometimes dangerous, frequently existing in gray areas between legal and illegal, but it was real. The work mattered. The people I helped protect were worth protecting, and I was using abilities I'd spent a decade developing for purposes that actually challenged me. My resignation from Morrison and Associates was anticlimactic. Craig accepted my notice with mild disappointment, asking if there was anything the firm could do to convince me to stay. I cited better opportunities and personal growth, corporate speak that meant nothing but satisfied the requirements of professional courtesy. Rachel was harder to navigate, pressing for details about where I was going and why I was being so secretive. I'm working as a private financial consultant for a family business, I explained over our final lunch together. It's a great opportunity, better pay, more interesting work, but it comes with strict confidentiality requirements. You're being so mysterious about everything lately. I barely recognize you anymore. Her words stung because they were true. The person she'd known, the struggling accountant who'd gone on that disastrous blind date 6 months ago, no longer existed. I'd transformed into someone who worked for organized crime, who participated in interrogations, who'd found belonging in a world most people never glimpsed. The distance between who I'd been and who I'd become was unbridgeable. People change, I said softly. Sometimes circumstances force us to become versions of ourselves we didn't know existed. My first official day as Marcos's financial director coincided with the opening of a new restaurant, the 8th establishment in what was becoming a significant culinary empire. The legitimate businesses were thriving, generating real profits that had nothing to do with criminal enterprise. I was helping build something sustainable, creating jobs and opportunities in communities that needed both. Sophia attended the opening, playing her role as the boss's daughter with practiced charm. She'd helped design the children's menu, insisting that restaurants should take kids seriously rather than just offering chicken fingers and mac and cheese. Watching her move through the crowd, already learning the social navigation that would define her adult life, I felt protective in ways that surprised me. This family had become mine, not through blood or marriage, but through choice and loyalty and shared experiences that had forged connections stronger than conventional relationships. I'd found my place in their world, carved out a role that used my talents while protecting people I'd come to care about. Marco found me near closing after the crowd had dispersed and staff were cleaning up. He looked tired but satisfied, the kind of exhaustion that came from success rather than struggle. "Walk with me." We walked through the restaurant's dining, empty now except for staff preparing for the next day. The space was beautiful, all warm lighting and carefully chosen artwork. The kind of establishment that would thrive because it offered quality without pretension. When I sent Sophia to that restaurant 6 months ago, Marco said quietly, "I had no idea how significantly you'd impact our lives. I was looking for an accountant I could trust. Instead, I found someone who's become essential to my family in ways I didn't anticipate." He stopped walking and turned to face me, his expression vulnerable in ways I'd rarely seen. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. The work you do for me, the protection you've helped provide for Sophia, the way you've navigated this world without losing your integrity, all of that matters more than I can express. But I also need you to know that my feelings have evolved beyond professional respect into something more personal." The admission hung between us, changing everything about our dynamic. This was Marco Valentini, a man who controlled significant criminal enterprises and commanded absolute loyalty from dozens of people, telling me that I mattered to him beyond my usefulness. "I care about you too," I said, the words feeling both terrifying and necessary. "I care about Sophia. I care about what you're building here. And yes, I care about you in ways that have nothing to do with work or money or any of the practical reasons I tell myself explain why I'm here." His hand found mine, fingers intertwining with surprising gentleness from someone capable of such calculated violence. "Then stay, not just as my financial director, but as part of my family in every way that matters." The future stretched before me, uncertain but no longer suffocating. I'd walked into a restaurant 6 months ago expecting a blind date with a man who never showed. Instead, I'd found a little girl with old eyes who delivered a message that changed everything. That blind date had been empty because something better was waiting. A life that challenged me, work that mattered, and a family that had claimed me as their own despite all the complicated circumstances that should have kept us separate. I looked at Marco, at the man who'd seen potential in me when I'd been drowning in debt and desperation, who'd offered opportunities that transformed my entire existence. "We're not conventional," I said. "This isn't how normal families work." His smile was warm, genuine, touched with relief. "We stopped being conventional the moment you accepted my offer. But we're family nonetheless, bound by choices and loyalty and trust that matters more than blood." He was right. I'd found my family in the most unexpected place, built connections through morally complicated circumstances, and discovered that belonging wasn't about following rules but about finding people worth protecting. The blind date that never happened had led me here, to this restaurant, to this man, to this life that felt more authentic than anything I'd experienced in my previous existence, and I wouldn't change any of it.